For context for everything that Matt's going to tell you, this pie chart shows you the main sources of the Church of England as a whole's greenhouse gas emissions from our 2020 data. Now, we know 2020 was an unusual year because of buildings being closed because of the pandemic. We suspect that that's probably made the church segment of this pie chart smaller than it would be in a normal year. But the story will be roughly the same, which is that schools make up about half of the Church of England's carbon footprint. Then the next biggest slice being churches, and the next slice after that being housing. Housing, obviously, we have many buildings, each one with a relatively low carbon footprint, but we have a lot of them. Then there are some things like our cathedrals and our offices, where we have a very small number of them, but they have a high carbon footprint each. If you take as a very good rule of thumb that the carbon footprint of a building is going to be basically related to how big is the space that you're trying to heat and how many hours a week are you trying to heat it, then that gives you a good sense of why our schools come out so high, even though we have 4 times as many churches as we do have schools. Within that, it's really important to remember that the main source of our energy use is our heating. We know from this sample of churches and church halls, 84% of their energy use, so that's electricity, oil and gas, was for their heating.
And I've got you for about the next 5 minutes to run through very quickly some awareness around heat pumps and what they are. And you've probably heard of heat pumps, and you've probably heard of ground source heat pumps, and you know that involves stuff going in the ground. You've probably heard of air source heat pumps. What you probably haven't heard of is actually there's different flavors of those in between. So very quickly, ground source heat pump. You have something that goes into the ground. Often now, actually, it's a deep drill down in piles, extracts the heat out of the ground, compresses that, and puts that heat then into the building. It works really well with underfloor heating systems. It works really well when we're building new buildings, but incredibly difficult to get into existing buildings, particularly our churches, which obviously have ground which has lots of archaeology in them. So perhaps not so good for that. Now, all heat pumps have a measure of how efficient they are, which is called the coefficient of performance. Which is abbreviated to COP, and then that's measured over a whole heating season or a whole year. So it's a seasonal coefficient of performance. So that then gets to being an SCOP or a SCOP. And that is a ratio of how many units of electricity you need to put into that heat pump to get how many units of heat you get out by putting 1 unit of electricity into that heat pump. So if you give it 1 unit of electricity, that pump does all its wonderful stuff. And with a ground source heat pump, you'll get 4 units of heat out for that 1 unit of electricity you put in. So that's got a coefficient of performance of 4. If you want to put it in another term, it's 400% efficient. And compare that to a gas boiler, and even the best gas boilers are probably only 95% efficient. This is 400% efficient. So you can understand why it's a good and well-promoted technology in there. Then we look at air-to-air source heat pumps. And I said this really probably is the mainstay of what we need to be doing. This is what they look like on the outside of a building. They probably look very familiar to you because you probably recognize them as air conditioning systems. And most air conditioning systems can heat as well as cool. And this is what these do. They're very similar. In fact, they're almost exactly identical to air conditioning systems. When you install an air-to-air source heat pump, there are just a few technical little bits of control system on it, which means that it heats as its main thing and cools as its secondary thing, rather than the other way around. But basically, they are exactly the same. They take heat out of the air, they compress it into a refrigerant gas at the external unit, they put that refrigerant gas into the building, and then you have units inside the building that can push that heat into there. The coefficient of performance around that is 5, so even more efficient than ground source, so 500% efficient. They can also cool. That's quite important actually for a number of our schools where they do suffer from overheating on a few days in the summer as well. Because they also have blown air, they can rapidly warm up spaces. So they've got a warm-up period of around about 20 minutes into most rooms. If you think about a classroom or a hall, probably a little bit longer for very large churches, because they've got greater air volume. The external units, you can see here, there's one on the flat roof of a school. or they can go down at ground level and be covered up, as long as they've got airflow through them. That this is a unit, and you've got another one just off the edge of this picture, actually the primary school that we went to there. Internally, a lot of people worry about what they look like internally, because you'll be very used to seeing these sorts of systems, the plastic white boxes on the wall with the little louvers that move in and out, or actually hidden up behind suspended ceilings. And these are very relevant actually for our schools. These sorts of solutions hidden up in suspended ceilings work really well. In little offices, these things again fit in quite nicely. You can get some more elegant looking units now, which just look a little bit nicer as well. But it doesn't all have to be the horrible lump of a white plastic stuck on the wall. We can also get internal units for air-to-air systems, which are floor mounted and look very much like fan convector radiators. So you probably walked into that building in this room and think that was just a normal radiator on the wall. In fact, that's the internal unit of an air-to-air heat pump. So that's available. You can see different makes, different models out there. So they don't need to look much different from a radiator. And that's quite important when we come into churches, and those large churches where they may have already radiators down the wall, and we can replace them for these without the appearance changing massively. Air to water, very quickly on that. And this again is an air to water system installed at a school. That takes the heat out of the air, and it compresses that heat, but rather than putting it into a refrigerant gas, which is what the air-to-air system did, it puts it directly into the water system that then circulates around radiators. It's very good at producing water up to around about 50 degrees. After that, a normal air-to-air system, air-to-water system will struggle a little bit. You need good flow rates around a heating system. So if you've got small bore pipework, or you've got single pipe systems, that we do still have, they ain't going to work. They need to have much better flow rates within that. Most of the plant is outside. You can see here, very minimal plant inside. You just see a bit of pipework and a few pumps and a few control panels on the walls. No major plant inside at all, which can sometimes be helpful. But actually their coefficient of performance is much less. So that's about a 3.5. It's about 350% efficient. So compare that to air, which is 500%. You can see that why air-to-air is perhaps coming to be more relevant. You can have high temperature air to water systems. So see that one of the major failures on the earlier one was actually it only produced water up to around 50 degrees. And within a lot of our radiator systems, we need hot water that's hotter than that. So you can get high temperature air to air systems. So that produces water up to about 75 degrees. It's got a secondary cycle, so it almost goes through two versions of the kind of compressing the heat within the heat pump part, but actually that reduces its efficiency. So that brings it down to about 2.5 or 250% efficient. But it is easier to integrate with existing radiator systems. It does need internal and external space, because you've got these two elements going on. You've got the heat pump itself, and you've got the internal unit gives that secondary kind of boost to get that temperature up. So you need both going on, and they do tend to be rather more expensive as well. So they're still relevant, they're still part of our toolkit, but they are less efficient and they are more expensive in there. Electric point of use hot water heaters, you've probably seen them, but this is what we need to have everywhere. These sorts of units you can see there on your slide, hidden underneath sinks. You can get units that range from just a few litres that are very useful to doing a wash hand basin or a small class sink, up to 100 litres, which is much more ideal for big commercial kitchens that we might have within our schools and our offices and the like. And you can also get instantaneous ones that just heat the water as it flows through and have no storage at all, which is obviously very good for Legionella in there. And you can now get centralised electric hot water systems as well. Normal tank, as we're used to seeing, but actually the top half of this tank, you can just sort of, not half, sorry, top section of the tank, just above that light grey line there, is actually an air source heat pump. And actually you've got a packaged unit, a cylinder of hot water, which has got an air source heat pump on the top of it. That's ducted in the same way as a flue would have gone out to external air. So that can go directly into plant rooms, which is really useful actually where we've got things like lots of showering going on in sports blocks and we need a large volume of stored hot water. So we've got those solutions out there as well. So I thought I'd just run through that very quickly. So hopefully you'll forgive me for taking a few minutes to go through that at the end and just bring up that familiarization of heat pumps. So just as a sort of reminder, really, even with the broad range of buildings that we've got, the range of ages, of listings, of styles, of everything else, we've got the technical solutions. I've just described those main ones that we need to deliver net zero carbon. We can do it today. Technically, they also deliver that cost saving in there as well. Yes, there are some barriers that we need to work through, but by working together, I think that's really going to be a solution that we can get there, and 2030 is achievable.